Right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session of our weekly webinar series. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome 3 of our research students from the Caribbean and in Africa who will be sharing with us their research. And of course, their research is at different stages of development. Some of them are finished and about to be presented for examination. Some of them are in conceptualization, and some of them are in the mid-range space. So it'd be very useful for our students for you to be able to listen to the work that they're engaging in the field, as well as provide them with really useful constructive feedback for continuing a development as they progress and as they become one of us, members of academia. So I ask that you show your support for them as we engage in today's session. Let me just take a minute to apologize for our colleague, Professor Milton, who has a clashing commitment today, so may not be able to join us. I want to welcome Professor Vonani, who I did see that she's joined, and all our regular attendees, Dr. Joy Ndifu-Bab, Dr. Mervyn Lin. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here with us today as we continue this journey. So I want to open the floor very quickly to invite Mrs. Paula Alleyne, a PhD candidate of the University of the West Indies, and she's going to present her research entitled Psychosocial Realities of Care Leavers and Implications for Educational Attainment, a Barbadian Context. So Paula, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Okay, let me just share my screen.
So while we are waiting for Paula to share her screen, each student will get about 15 to 20 minutes to present, and we will take all questions at the end of all the presentations. So we'll go from each student, allow each student to present without disruption, and then I'm going to ask that all your questions be taken at the end of all our students' presentations. So Paula, I hand the floor back over to you.
Okay, great. Just making sure everyone can see my screen.
We can.
Okay, good morning, everyone. As was stated, my name is Paula Alleyne from the Caribbean Educational Research Center, and it is indeed a pleasure to be here. And today I wanted to take a look at one component of my research on care leavers in Barbados. And this is the component that related to education. And to give you some context of why I started this research, being the founder of a charity working with children in residential care, having done professional attachments at the Child Care Board, which is the leading child care authority in Barbados, and talking with homeless persons who had childhood histories in residential care, I became concerned of what happened to children when they aged out of institutionalized care. When these individuals mature out of government's care, what happens to them and what are their transition experiences into Barbadian society like? And as I started to research this topic, I realized that Caribbean literature on this phenomenon is extremely limited, and there is no published academic research on the transition experiences within Barbados. So I therefore conducted a phenomenological study on care leavers in Barbados, looking at their psychosocial experiences while in residential care and the impact on their lives as adults in society. And you hear me mention the term care leavers. A care leaver is an individual who previously lived within a care institution, and these individuals have been deemed as a vulnerable population. And why have they been deemed vulnerable? Well, they have been found to have low educational attainment and employment, and also have poor trajectories of unplanned pregnancies and infractions with the law. I recently attended the AERA 2024 annual meeting in Philadelphia, and the theme for our Caribbean and African Studies Symposium was actually deconstructing inequity and the marginalization of learners in Caribbean educational systems. And when I heard that—
Paula, slow down a little bit. I'm getting feedback there that you're a bit too fast. So just slow down.
Okay, I will slow down a little bit. So let me start over. I recently attended, is this speed a little better? I recently attended the AERA 2024 annual meeting in Philadelphia. And the theme for the Caribbean and African Studies Symposium was deconstructing inequity and the marginalization of learners in Caribbean educational systems. And when I heard that theme, it made me think of an experience from one of my pilot study participants. That is Mary. She experienced stigmatization both in the classroom setting as a child and as she matured in the wider society. So to give you an example, Mary, who was 55, self-employed and engaged to be married, recounted a time when she completed a task in the class and she made an elated sound. And one of her classmates then responded, "Man, you don't gotta worry about she. She ain't got no mother nor no father. She in a children's home, so you don't gotta worry about she. She must would do that all the time." And in Mary's mind, she had no idea why the classmate would have said that. But wherever the classmate got that concept from, it hurt her deeply as a child. And that was a childhood experience. And as a child, that experience would have impacted Mary in two different ways. Firstly, internally, at the individual level, Mary was experiencing what Erik Erikson termed in his psychosocial stages of development, the industry versus inferiority stage. And during this stage, children are at school between ages 5 to 12. They're developing their literacy skills, and both teachers and peers begin to play a significant role within their lives. The opinions of classmates at that time start to inform their self-identity, and self-esteem is being developed. So surely that comment from Mary's classmate did nothing in building her self-esteem. And another impact, the second impact, would have been seen socially in what Yuri Bronfenbrenner termed in his ecological systems theory, the macro system level. And at this level, there are ideologies and attitudes within culture that impact the individual. And this system has been deemed as extremely powerful, as it is a system in which an individual has the least control over. So what is evident is at that time, the classmate had a negative concept of children who were raised in children's homes. Her classmate was also a child and didn't just come up with that idea. The child would have had to be feeding on mindsets, on conversations and discussions with other persons in society that would inform his or her opinion of youth who were in residential care. And outside of the classroom setting, as Mary matured as an adult, she explained that she was always tomboyish in nature, in appearance, and she had a thick stature. And one day, two men, strangers on the road, saw her and said, "Man, when them come out the children's homes, then it's got messed up minds, yeah? You go and make friends with them, and the next thing you know, they got a knife to your throat." Again, Mary had no idea where these strangers got this concept of her. However, within society at that time and within the macro system she had to interface, that was her reality. So, what does this mean for institutionalized youth? It means that youth in children's homes have to be resilient if they are going to succeed as caregivers within society. And one author defines resilience as both the capacity to be bent without breaking and the capacity, once bent, to spring back. And it is this resilience that is imperative for institutionalized youth to be successful as caregivers. And one of the ways in which a caregiver can be resilient is through education. Unfortunately, literature demonstrates poor educational attainment for caregivers, and this poor education outcome has directly impacted their employment opportunities. Not only is there poor education and employment, but there is consistent international trend of caregivers not being in education, employment, or in training. The National Audit's Office in 2015, for example, their report showed that 41% of 19-year-old care leavers were not in employment, education, or in training. And in 2023, England's Department of Education reported similar findings where 41% of care leavers between 19 to 21 years were NEET, compared to the national percentage of only 12%. And this NEET challenge was also seen in the United States of America. In 2006, a Midwest study in the US revealed that care leavers were 3 times more likely to become NEET than youth in the general population. And these consistent reports therefore confirm Guyton et al.'s 2022 recommendation that educational support really should be provided for youth while they are in residential care, so as to facilitate their transitioning success towards independent living. Now, in my own study, I observed how educational attainment improved transition outcomes for care leavers. Suzanne, for example, received financial support from a community organization to pursue training in the hospitality industry, and she was now currently employed in that field. Kisha determined that when she was in the children's home, that she would get a scholarship. In Kisha's mind, this scholarship was her ticket out of the system. And she did indeed get that scholarship. The scholarship allowed her to migrate overseas and to gain a tertiary education. Kirk was another one who received tertiary education from an institution outside of Barbados. He was employed. Carlos received a post-secondary education and was employed. Aisha was the only one who did not receive post-secondary education, and she was unemployed. My research also showed that to care leavers, education was valued. Suzanne herself encouraged youth who were currently in Barbados's residential care system to get as much education as they could get because, as she said, that is avenues for them. Findings from my research showed that there were parallels between my local study and international literature. The Barbadian research showed that care leavers received both financial and emotional support to pursue higher education. And this is true with the literature which demonstrates that care leavers require support to pursue higher education. Aisha was the only one who did not have post-secondary education and was unemployed. Literature highlights that those who do not have post-secondary education also have a low employment attainment, and this was found to be true in Aisha's circumstance. The care leavers who received post-secondary education either had opportunities to create lives for themselves outside of Barbados or they were employed. And this was parallel to literature which reveals that education, it leads to opportunities and employment, and therefore improves their transition outcomes. Having said this, what does this mean for educators? It means that educators must understand where children are psychologically and socially. They must understand that at the school level age, they are in the microsystem or inner circle of institutionalized youth, and that they impact their mental development. Educators play a pivotal role in the development of their self-identity. Educators must be aware of children who reside within residential care and observe if they have any behavioral challenges which can impact their educational attainment, or if they have children who develop feelings of inferiority due to delayed learning. And if they do, seek to implement measures that can assist them in their academic journey. Educators should also serve as mentors, encouraging them to pursue post-secondary education and also develop a classroom culture that was intolerant to discrimination. So going back to the previous thought of improving the outcomes for institutionalized children and removing any type of marginalization within educational systems, how can this be done? Well, firstly, we need to understand that inequities and stigmatization of vulnerable communities is part of a cultural ideology at the macro system level. And this requires multifaceted efforts in our discourses or our sayings, our doings or our actions among each other, and our relations or our relatings, not only at the lateral level in the school setting, but vertically with policymakers within the educational setting. This multi-tiered approach inevitably changes the practices seen within the classroom context. Educators and principals, who are lead agents of change, they set the cultural tone within the school environment. And just as in Mary's scenario, where she experienced stigmatization at a young age in the classroom setting, more importantly would have been the teacher's response to that scenario. And finally, educators can create a classroom culture where discrimination is not tolerated. The vulnerable have a sense of security, and children, especially those in residential care, they should be motivated to learn and pursue post-secondary education, thereby improving their transition outcomes when they leave the children's home. And I thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that, Paula. Really, really interesting findings and a lot for us to talk about. Colleagues, while we transition to the next student, I would want you to begin posting your questions in the chat so Paula can address them when we get to that component of the session. So Paula gave us back some time, which is good, because we will well use that time in the question and answer session. Thank you so much, Paula. Nitha, so we'll now move to Nitha Mauricette-Philip, another student from the University of the West Indies, and she's going to present on what are we doing in the name of assessment, a mixed method study to investigate Caribbean teachers, conceptions, and assessment practices with a focus on mathematical proficiency. So we've shifted from understanding the world of care leavers and the impact and influence and the implications for the education system. And now we're going to dive into the landscape of mathematics and paying attention in particular to mathematical proficiency. Nitha, again, remembering that we are in an international space and our Caribbean accent can be difficult for some. So I'd ask you to remember to slow down. One of the characteristics of us as Caribbean people is that we speak really fast. So remember, slow down. Great. Over to you, Nitha. You have your 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, good day, everyone. I will definitely try to speak slowly. My name is Nitha Mauricette-Philip, and I am so elated to share with you a summary of my research proposal. I am a doctoral student at the University of the West Indies, Cable campus. What are we doing in the name of assessment? What are we doing in the name of assessment? A mixed method study to investigate Caribbean teachers' conceptions and assessment practices with a focus on mathematical proficiency. Now, why did I feel compelled to investigate teachers' conceptions and their practices? Why is this research so significant? We are very aware of the unsatisfactory mathematics performance of our students locally, globally, and this particular phenomenon is not only a situation in the Caribbean, but if we look at South Africa and the world, we realize that our students are really struggling with mathematics. They're really struggling to get a pass in mathematics at high-stake examinations. Let us look at our regional examinations. In the Caribbean, we have what we call an exit exam at the primary school level, and we also have a CXC examination, which is at the end of high school. And if we look at the results, and I only have results for 3 islands, but this really provides a snapshot into what really is happening in the Caribbean, especially in the English-speaking Caribbean islands. If you look at our results in the external part of the primary school assessment examination, you would notice, and please note that the external exam is a multiple choice exam. You will notice that our students are struggling to get a pass mark in mathematics. On average, the students are ranging from about 30-something% to about 53% passes in mathematics. Now, do you think this gets a little better in the high school? Let's look at the same islands and let's look at the secondary level. Again, our students are struggling to get a pass rate in CSEC mathematics. In fact, the research is showing that almost 60 to 70% of our students are failing to pass mathematics when they are leaving high school. So this particular problem has been deemed a crisis in our Caribbean context, and I'm sure in the world as well. And persons have been trying to find solutions to this problem.
Sorry, Nitha, but your presentation isn't moving.
Oh,
Yeah.
Are we there? Right. So this particular issue has been a problem for many. Can you see?
We're seeing it, but are you meant to still be on your first screen?
Yes. Are you seeing
Okay,
assessment
good.
determines students' achievement?
No, we don't see that.
Oh.
So I know you're using a Prezi format.
So let me use this
maybe,
one.
yeah,
Are you seeing here now?
we are seeing it now. Excellent.
Oh,
Good.
wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. Very good. So like I said before, this particular issue with mathematics performance has been deemed a crisis in the Caribbean and worldwide. And for many years, the researchers have tried to find solutions to this problem. 30 years ago, Black and William introduced the whole idea of formative assessment in their article, Inside the Black Box. And they indicated that if we want to see our students perform better in high-stake examinations, we would need to look closely at the classroom. What exactly happens at the classroom level? And they started to push forward the whole idea of formative assessment. And 30 years ago, if you look at all our curriculum reform in mathematics and also in other education areas, you would recognize that we have a push and a thrust to include formative assessment in our curriculum, and that's 30 years ago. In the Caribbean, in 2016, for the CSEC mathematics exam, the Caribbean Assessment Council, CXC, they introduced the whole idea of school-based assessment, SBAs, to more or less utilize the whole idea of formative assessment to see whether there will be some improvement in the students' results at the CSEC examination. And as you notice in the slide in the slide below, as you notice before, I'm getting some feedback, sorry. As you noticed before, you would realize that although SBAs were introduced, however, the students' results still seem poor. So 20 years ago, Blackman introduced the idea of formative assessment, and still our students are still struggling in getting a pass mark in mathematics. In 2020, COVID hit, and the world stood still and we had to move to remote learning. And what the researchers in the United States, Baker et al., recognized is that because of this remote learning environment, this put a spotlight on teachers' practices, assessment practices. And one of the things they recognize that teachers are more or less assessing what is easy and not what we value. And in mathematics education, what is it that we value? We value students being proficient in mathematics. And what does that mean? That means our students not only need to be able to solve or more or less go through procedures in a flexible way, but they are also able to solve complex problems, which is what we want in our 21st century learner. In 2023, we have Caribbean researcher William McBean out of Jamaica. She went and she started looking at the practices of teachers in the classroom, in the language art in particular. And she's noticed that our teachers rather, in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, they are teaching to the test. So in other words, although there's a big thrust in formative assessment, teachers are still teaching to the test. So after researching and looking and reading a lot, I have no choice but to agree with Satam et al. And Remisal 2011, when they said that although there has been significant research in mathematics education, the research has been on tangible things that you can see. For example, large-scale assessment practices, teachers' techniques. You also have research in terms of technology, but there seem to be a lack of significant research which focus on the beliefs and the conceptions that make around this research. So in other words, you have a lot of research, but there's not much research that speaks to what's happening inside of here, in the minds of our teachers. So in 2002, we have Professor Brown. He pushed the idea of teachers' conception of assessment in his research. And that's about 20-something years ago. He indicated that if you want to understand what's happening in terms of teachers' assessment practices, we need to start to understand teachers' conceptions of assessment. And with his research, he was able to develop 2 instruments which looked at assessing teachers' conceptions at the primary and secondary level. And he came up with 4 main broad conceptions of assessment that teachers may have. He came up with the idea that teachers conceive assessment as or for improvement. Teachers conceive assessment as accountability, teacher accountability. So in other words, teachers see assessment as looking at whether teachers are doing what they're supposed to do. He looked at the whole idea of conception of assessment in terms of student accountability, and also he looked at the irrelevant conception of assessment, where teachers believe that assessment is not important. Assessment causes anxiety, stress, and so this assessment practices are not important. When I started to look further at teachers' conception of assessment, I recognized that teachers' conception of assessment are influenced by contextual and cultural and local factors. Additionally, I realized in the research that if we want to develop mathematical proficiency, teachers need to assess for mathematical proficiency. So in other words, I recognized there was a lot of gap in the research. Firstly, there's a gap in the research in terms of looking at mathematical teachers' assessment, conceptions of assessment. There was limited research pairing classroom assessment practices, which promotes mathematics proficiency. And the research was yet to pair teachers' conception of assessment and classroom assessment practices, which promotes mathematical proficiency. Now, why is this research so significant? And apart from the fact that it will help with adding to the body of research, one of the things I found was very important. I felt that when we go in and try to investigate teachers' conceptions, what will happen is that we will first acknowledge these conceptions first, and this will allow us then to challenge these conceptions and eventually cause that change that we want in conception, so that we can actually see a thrust in pushing the whole idea of formative assessment, which would hopefully help with our students' issue in terms of mathematics education. So, what exactly is my research about? What is it I want to do, right? What is my purpose? The primary objective of this study is to investigate the relationship between teachers from 2 Caribbean islands, Grenada and St Lucia, self-reported conceptions of assessment and their self-reported and observed assessment practices with a focus on mathematical proficiencies. Now, my research questions, I have quantitative research questions. What are the primary teachers' conceptions of assessment in St Lucia and Grenada? What are the assessment practices in St Lucia and Grenada? What is the relationship between the primary teachers' conception of assessment and their assessment practices with a focus on mathematical proficiency in St Lucia and Grenada? How do teachers in St Lucia and Grenada describe and justify their current classroom-based assessment practices for assessing mathematical proficiency? And how do the cognitive interview and observation of teacher practices help to further explain how primary teachers assess mathematical proficiency in St Lucia and Grenada? Now, you'll probably say, a whole Caribbean, why these 2 islands, right? We want to start at the foundational level. So I'm starting at the primary school level. Also, in terms of Grenada, Grenada was the first OECS island to implement the Caribbean Primary Exit Examination in 2012. And St. Lucia is the latest island to implement this particular primary exit assessment in 2022. Additionally, we have a harmonized primary curriculum being developed in the Caribbean, and also our students all sit the CXC and the CPA exam. So I'm just going to quickly look at the key terms that we are talking about in terms of conceptions. Now, how do we define conception? How does the research define conceptions? Now, conception is a little bit more broad than beliefs. Conception refers to the affective, attitudes, and cognitive beliefs that educators hold regarding assessment, which they likely hold in response to the practice environment and policies in which they are employed. So this is how we're going to look at assessment. And in terms of mathematical proficiency, it is defined, as a coherent combination of conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, strategical competence, adaptive reasoning, and productive disposition. This is really from Kilpatrick et al. In their research, where they looked at 5 strands of mathematical proficiency. Okay, now, central to any research is its conceptual framework. This conceptual framework is really the framework that my research is built upon. It is the lens through which that I make sense of my findings and also to justify my methodology. And so I created this conceptual framework based on or developed from multiple sources. Okay, this conceptual framework is situated in the social constructivist theory. And why is that? Because knowledge is really developed through interaction. Additionally, this conceptual framework was based on Bandura's reciprocal determinism theory. And this particular concept is where Bandura looked at behavior and was able to propose that behavior is influenced by cognitive factors and environmental factors. And there's this interrelatedness and this interaction between behavior, cognition, and environment. Also, my conceptual framework is based on Brown's theory of teachers' conceptions of assessment, and also research on contextual factors and also mathematical proficiency. So if you look at my conceptual framework, you realize I have an equilateral triangle where you have all sides are equal. You have 3 main constructs. You have the teacher conceptions of assessment, you have the contextual factors, you have classroom assessment practices in relation to mathematical proficiency, and you realize there's this interconnection where one is related or one is influenced by the other equally. So, for example, teachers' conceptions would be influenced by contextual factors, which would be influenced by the practices that occurs in the classroom. Likewise, practices would be influenced by contextual factors and vice versa. Now, let's quickly look at the literature and also maybe the gaps in literature. Now, because of time, I'm just going to summarize the key literature based on the 3 main constructs from my conceptual framework. So, and then I deliberately put a spotlight on research from Africa, the Africa countries, my initial research rather, and the Caribbean as well because of my audience. So what is it in the research that speaks to teachers' conceptions of assessment? Again, you would notice that in the literature, Brown is featured a lot. Although he introduced the idea over 20 years ago, right? He, over the years, has done extensive research all over the world, from New Zealand, from Greece, from Egypt, Spain, Ecuador, Canada. His research and his instrument to assess teachers' conception of assessment has been used all over, except in the Caribbean context. So he's pushing the whole idea of teachers' conceptions of assessment. They are all, or they fall under these 4 main broad areas. Okay, from the research or previous research have highlighted that conceptions of assessment are complex and interrelated, and that educators can hold multiple interactive conceptions of assessment. The research also reported that primary and secondary teachers are more likely to conceptualize assessment as summative or for accountability purposes or for improvement. And what is very, 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 very obvious in the research is that you notice that we have limited research on mathematics teachers' conceptions of assessment. All right, and then we go to practices. What is it in the literature that speaks to practices? The general findings in terms of conception of assessment and assessment practices. The studies reveal that one, the idea of conception can impact, or the belief of conceptions can impact one's actions. Also, practice has an impact on conceptions. And also the setting or the context both influence our conceptions and practice. So you see in the literature, there's this relationship or interconnection between conception, practice, and context. Again, there's no literature pairing teachers' conception of assessment and assessment practices for mathematical proficiency. Okay. And in terms of the context, what is the literature saying about context? Setting influences both conceptions and practices. The context influences the manifestation of teachers' assessment beliefs. So clearly, we see in the literature there is that relationship. Now, in terms of the spotlight on South Africa, initially, so far, I have noticed that I'm only able to really find 2 articles related to teachers' conceptions of assessment. An article in 2007 and a more recent one in 2022. Okay, one of them, the 2007 article is a qualitative study, and the 2022 is more of a quantitative study. But what is interesting about the 2020 study is that the researchers use Brown's assessment instrument to assess teachers' conceptions. And what is it that we find in the findings? The result reveals that teachers mostly agree to the accountability and improvement conceptions of assessment. And there's a positive relationship found between conceptions of assessment and practices. That's what's happening in South Africa. Okay. In the Caribbean, I was only able to get 1 article on conception of assessment, teachers' conception of assessment in English language. And it's very recent, 2024, but it's a qualitative study by Dr. McBean out of Jamaica. And some of the findings were, 1, there's a strong grading culture in the Caribbean. The instructors mostly hold beliefs in the improvement and accountability aspect of assessment, while primarily exhibiting behaviors related to management and improvement. And what's interesting is that the English Jamaican teachers, although they believe that assessment is for improvement, right? They use a lot of traditional assessment strategies. They use summative assessment and also accountability for accountability purposes. So they believe it's for improvement, but they use a lot of traditional assessment practices. And one of the main findings from that research indicated that policy changes are needed to support formative assessment practices. So quickly, how am I going to answer all of my questions?
Yes, right, because your time is up, Nitha. So just see if you can wrap up.
Yes, so quickly, I'm going to use a mixed method approach, explanatory sequential mixed method approach. And if you notice, this is an approach where I'm going to first use a quantitative phase where I'm going to provide a survey used from Brown, and then afterwards I'm going to use the qualitative phase where I'm going to use the interview and so on. Okay. In terms of my participants, okay, like I said, I'm going to use teachers from Grenada and St Lucia. The survey, about 532 teachers from Grenada and St Lucia. And also I'm going to use 20 teachers for interviews and about 10 for observation, okay? In terms of my research paradigm, I'm going to use more of a pragmatism philosophy, where I believe that, my philosophy that really governs my research is that of pragmatism, where I believe that I am going to use the best methods to get to my solution. And because of time, I'm going to end hair. So I'm very excited about this research, and I hope that you are as well, because clearly there's a lot of research that needs to happen in South Africa and in the Caribbean regarding teachers' conceptions as it relates to assessment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Nitha. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you for showing us ways in which we can collaborate across the Caribbean and the African diaspora. That's a fundamental purpose for this engagement and these webinars. And so I thank you for getting us going. We will move very quickly to our final student, but in no means last. I want to welcome Mr. Gabriel Mahi, a PhD candidate from the University of Zululand. And he is going to be presenting on improving participation of educator governors in school governance at 3 public farm schools in Amajuba Education District. Thank you so much. So we want to hand over to Gabriel, over to you for your presentation. Again, you have between 15 to 20 minutes. So Gabriel, over to you. Gabriel, are you there with us?
Yes, Doc. Thanks.
Good. So you can share your screen and you can proceed.
All right. Is it appearing?
Not yet.
Hello?
Not yet. It's not, we're not seeing anything yet. Have you pressed share screen?
Let me go back.
Right. So remember, you are clicking on share screen on the Zoom screen so that you can then proceed from there.
Yes.
Good. I see the conversation has started in the chat. So while we're waiting for Gabriel to get his PowerPoint presentation going, maybe we can engage with each other in the chat. Welcome to the university. Gabriel, do you want to send me your PowerPoint presentation and I will share it for you? I'm sending you my email address.
Okay, it's fine.
That might make it easier. So if you send me your PowerPoint presentation, I can share it and you will just tell me when to share, when to shift screens for you.
All right.
So send it to me as an email.
Okay. Where is your, have you sent your email, Doc?
I did, I put it in the chat. So can you find the chat?
Yes.
Right, so it's in the chat for this meeting.
Trying to open it. It's very, very slow, man.
Okay, so maybe what we do, Gabriel, while we're waiting for you to send me your PowerPoint presentation, and we are going to facilitate that. Vonani, Professor Vonani, I see that you're in. Do you want to do a summary of the 2 presentations that we've had so far? And maybe by then, hopefully, Gabriel would have sent me his PowerPoint and we could take his own. So I want to invite Professor Vonani to the floor to do a reflection on the 2 presentations while we wait for Gabriel.
Yes, thanks. I don't know if I will do justice to the proper reflections. However, I wanted to share my video for a while before I take it off. I just want to first appreciate our 2 colleagues, Paula and Nitha, for the wonderful presentation, very relevant to our South African context as well. And the way in which they have also shared the literature, certainly from the Caribbean globally, and available, or what they could find also in the country. I was trying to check, I wish there was somebody in mathematics education in the South African context, for example, or a psychologist on the platform who would do this reflection much easier than I would try to do. And so mine, Laurette, is to just also appreciate, I hope also the intention of this platform of sharing and of collaboration came through quite well from both presentations, as you indicated. I was looking reflective deeply, for example, on Paula's work, and the setup in South Africa about you know, the care, the residential care and the transition, and realized that I don't know much, but most of what she was saying and referencing was very relatable. So I'd like to hear if there are students from South Africa who could step in on that one as well, because certainly there are lessons to be learned in terms of you know, where the research first and foremost should be going, and where the collaboration could zoom into. Mathematics is a problem in South Africa as well. The way Nitha also alluded to the challenges we could relate with quite a lot. And I like that she's choosing to use mixed method, and hopefully we'll get to hear the voices of the teachers as well, instead of just applying the tool. I hear she will, Nitha, you will apply is it Brown's tool?
Mhm.
But I liked the fact that you wanted to be pragmatic about it. So looking forward to what will come out of that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Vanani. Gabrielle, what's your status? I didn't see the email. So is it that you're in a state where you're ready to present?
Have you received the email?
No, I haven't. So is it that you can present on your end then?
Or must I present?
I'm sorry, I missed that. What did you say?
I've sent the email.
Yes, I think what you could be doing, Gabriel, is to try again. If you sent and it's sent, and there's no like misspelling of the email, and maybe you could in the meantime be starting your presentation again. Yeah.
All right. The email goes like this. Laura.
No, you spelled
You
it
hear
in.
me?
Yes, Gabrielle, but you spelled it incorrectly already. So that's probably why I didn't get it. It's Laureette.
Laurette dot Bristol. Am I right?
You are correct. Go ahead.
At Coven Hill, what? Covey Hill.
cavehill.ue.edu.
Cave Hill. Cave Hill. Dot. You win.
Gabriel,
Yes,
if
That's-
this is Wanani from University of Venda, I'm saying if that is complicated, I've also posted another one on the chat. But Laurette, maybe we could engage.
I've sent it.
Okay,
I've
so
sent
Gabriel,
it.
okay, Gabrielle, so I'm still waiting for it. So it's not there. So what Professor Vanani is saying is that maybe you can do your presentation, even if we can't see the PowerPoint, maybe you can do your presentation. So please please do your presentation, because we want to give you the space to share your work with us. And we are conscious
Okay.
of time. So please proceed to do your presentation. You have 15 to 20 minutes. If the PowerPoint comes in, I will share it at that time. Yeah?
No, thanks. Thanks,
So
doctors.
please proceed.
The title is Improving Participation of Educator Governors in School Governance. It's 3 public farm schools in Amajuba Education District. So the aim of the study is to formulate a strategy to improve participation of educator governors in school governance in 3 public farm schools at Amajuba Education District. What is the problem there? Is that 3 public farm schools in the Amajuba Education District do not appear to have democratically elected educator governors who are participating in decision-making at the school level. So as a former employee of the Department of Education, I benefited from my observation of and conversation with different members of school governing bodies from various schools who were in charge of running schools in the same setting. And then the previous research from Kaba has shown a strong tendency for educator governors in SGPs to function as watchdogs for their teaching colleagues. Instead of working as a governing body together with other components, they work as watchdogs for their peers. What is the research aim? The research aim is, I will repeat what I've said, is just to form a strategy to improve their participation in school governance. The objectives are as follows. 1 is to understand the need for formulating a strategy on improving educator governors' participation in school governance. 2, to explore approaches to support the educator governors' participation in school governance. 3, to investigate conducive conditions that enable the approaches of participation of educator governors in school governance in public farm schools to work. 4thly, to anticipate threats to emerging approaches aimed at participation of educator governors in public farm schools. Lastly, to highlight indicators of success of best practices that enable participation of educator governors in school governance in public farm schools. Then the research questions are, what is the need of formulating a strategy? 2, what approaches are there to support educator governors in participation in school governance? What are plausible, conducive conditions that enable approaches on participation of educator governors in school governance in public farm schools to work? What possible threats are there to emerging approaches aimed at participation of educator governors in school governance in public farm schools? Lastly, what are the indicators of success and best practices? Coming to the theoretical framework, this study is located within critical emancipatory theory, which seeks to critique, challenge, and transform society. 2, it advances democratic ideals and is focused on promoting social fairness, as there is no social fairness when you look at that situation. It is employed in the study to identify and address unwholesome relationships in school governance, since these relationships lead to disputes and unresponsive school governing bodies, as well as dysfunctional school governing bodies. It offers theoretical foundation for planning, for a planning perspective that prioritizes participation of all stakeholders, exchange of information, and gaining consensus through conversation to enhance relations rather than just focusing on exercising power. Continuing with the theoretical framework, it is also concerned with identifying and eliminating inequalities that have already emerged. It is grounded on the social justice principles that demand the destruction of oppressive structures, the advancement of equity and fairness, and collaboration with participants, while guaranteeing that their voices are heard and that their experiences are validated. The participation, cooperation, change-oriented approach, openness, empowerment, accountability, and reciprocity are the cornerstones for the inclusion of the underprivileged, marginalized, and oppressed. Let us look at the historical background of CE and origin of CER. So there are numerous assumptions that have been made regarding the origins of CR. However, some scholars concur that it originated from critical theory of the Frankfurt School and arose in Germany in 1923 with the formation of the Institute of Social Research in Frankfurt. However, other scholars associate the origins and development of critical theory to a Marxist think tank who was funded by the wealthy son of a German millionaire who helped the Frankfurt School to create a groundbreaking brand of philosophically oriented radical social science. Now, in spite of uncertainty about who initiated the idea and founded it, as well as its exact origins, it is strongly associated with the Institute of Social Research in Frankfurt, which was established in 1923 at the University of Frankfurt, and the philosophers who founded the school were Horkheimer and Adorno. Looking at the research design and methodology, this study is located within qualitative research design. It is the study of phenomena, including their qualities, various manifestations, contexts in which they emerge, or potential points of view from which they might be viewed, excluding their range, frequency, and location in an unbiased analysis of cause and effect. Additionally, it seeks to understand people's subjective experiences, behaviors, and perception by gathering data through open-ended interviews and participant observation, as opposed to quantitative research, which seeks to quantify facts. The methodology SPA, which is participatory action research, which is employed as to generate data because it is a research approach that emphasizes participation and action against oppression, marginality, and inequalities, which are prevalent in our everyday life, more especially in school governance structures. It also emphasizes collective inquiry grounded in experience and social history, which results in the promotion of social justice as it challenges inequality. It is relevant to the study as it is critical to societal, educational, and leadership practices where unequal power relations are predominant. Analysis of data, critical CDA analysis of data, interpretation and reporting, Critical discourse analysis was to analyze, interpret data, and draw conclusions. And an in-depth method used to evaluate that data gathered as the textual, discursive, and social structural levels through a critical lens in order to expose power structures, ideologies, and social inequities encoded in the language is to uncover these elements. With the participants' permission, the information was tape recorded, transcribed, and analyzed to give it correct context and help the participants gain a better understanding of the data. What findings and recommendations? SGPs were operating in silos or tiny split groups. There was a lack of capacity building, unwillingness to take part in decision-making, intimidation and hostility treatment of educator governors by other school governors, polarization between educator governors and parent governors. Recommendations are devoted and dedicated team to be formed to encourage cooperation and open leadership, SGPs to receive introductory and continued training. SGPs should be given ample room to voice their opinions, and they should be treated as equals and with respect. SGPs should be encouraged to participate actively and constructively in all SGPs activities. Encourage and foster understanding, inclusivity, and collaborative decision making. That is the last item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Really appreciate it. And unfortunately, we could not get your PowerPoint presentation up, but you have also given us some good time back as well to be able to really fully engage in the discussion. And we see already a number of partnerships being forged. We have questions being posted in the chat. So let me just start with a question that was posed to Paula by Termin Ferdinand. And Termin is saying, hi, Paula, I think your research focus is centered upon an issue that is understudied, as you highlighted, especially in the Caribbean. In your research, how committed and positioned are government agencies to ensuring a reasonable transition to independence of care leavers, considering issues of access and equity? Paula, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And I will try to speak slowly. Yes, I believe that government agencies are committed to ensuring a reasonable transition, but there may be national financial limitations among other factors which may hinder effort. So for example, in the pilot study, a participant reported that her first housing after leaving residential care was provided from a government entity. Actually, it was called the National Housing Corporation. However, when I did the full-scale study, the corporation wasn't providing that type of housing accommodation. It was then the Child Care Board, the leading child care authority. They were trying to facilitate transition housing, started as a bridge to facilitate semi-independent living for those children leaving residential care. However, again, that wasn't sustained, and housing, when I did the interview, was no longer available. And anecdotal evidence suggests that this housing was also now being used to accommodate individuals who needed housing in an emergency natural disaster that occurred. So of course, that lended to another national dynamic of scarce housing within the island. So I think government, they are making efforts, but there are several challenges at the national level that can impede sustained efforts with children leaving residential care, but there are efforts.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Paula. I think one of the other challenges in relation to that and the provision for care leavers and their transition to independent living is a question of why it's such an under-researched area. And we recognize that people who are not necessarily seen are not necessarily considered and policy developed for them. So your research will go a long way in ensuring that caregivers are seen and that we should be designing policies for their transitions into independent living. But importantly, as an educator, it's important for us as educators to know how to cope, manage, and provide support for them as well. So thank you. Colleagues, let's keep the questions coming. There's a question for Nitha in the chat from Shelley. I hope I have that right. Nitha, is your research study improving the mathematical proficiency? If so, was the improvement realized? What was the improvement realized in terms of mathematical proficiency? So Nitha, maybe you might want to provide some more context in relation to this question.
All right, Shelley, thank you so much for your question. I sort of began responding in the chat as well. Okay, so in terms of, this is a research proposal. So in terms of going in and investigating, I'm at the initial stages where I'm sort of trying to go in to investigate this particular phenomenon. The issue is that there are many gaps. We have gaps in terms of teachers' conception of assessment. We have gaps in terms of assessing proficiency, mathematical proficiency in the classroom. So you have a lot of research on more or less instruction to develop mathematical proficiency, but you don't have research in terms of assessing those proficiencies. And the limited research that I have observed has shown that if we start to assess for mathematical proficiency, then you will see the teachers more or less making more efforts in developing mathematical proficiencies in their students, because again, teachers teach to the test. So if you're assessing, you will see some level of this back and forth happening. So I am excited about my findings, and we can always keep in touch in terms of where I am, and so I could share with you my various findings in the future.
Thanks for that, Nitha. And I do see that there's a conversation in the chat where you're being encouraged to reach out to another fellow PhD person. So please take advantage of that. I want to have Alfred open the mic, unmute himself so that he can ask a question. And if there are any other persons who wish to ask their questions live and direct, please just use the raise hand function in Zoom, and I will allow you to do so. Alfred, go right ahead.
Yeah, my question, thank you, Chair, is focused. It's directed at Nitha also. The first is just a remark to say that perhaps you could indicate in your title the level of the school or the education level in which the research is focused on, so that we know up front that is primary. I did see it later on that you were referring to primary. My worry is on there's a slide. I don't know whether you are going to put it back so that you know my point, where you are having the research, the methodology aspect, where you are talking about the quantitative question, the qualitative question, and the mixed focused questions. Yeah. I don't know whether you can put that.
Do you want to put back up that slide quickly, Nitha?
Yeah, that slide, yeah. Yes. Like you said, quantitative. You see, I've got a problem with the terminology that you are using there. For example, if you say when I don't know whether you are measuring conceptions in the first question there, number one, how is that quantitative in nature? If you are measuring conceptions, maybe I don't know whether there's an instrument or something.
Maybe you can answer that.
Yes. Then also the second one, what assessment practices are used? Purpose assessing. So assessing practices, a practice, how can you quantify a practice? Maybe convince us. The third one is fine to me. Then the qualitative is fine because you describe and justify, because that's the nature of qualitative, you know, the lived experiences. Yeah. Then the fifth one is a problem, just like the first two, to me at least, unless you convince me. How do cognitive interviews and observations of teacher practices help to further? Maybe you can expand into what do you envisage there, because cognitive interview, if you just say interview, it's normally qualitative oriented, fine. observation, of course, unless you qualify to say, I'm observing something which you quantify also. I just want to see, what do you have in mind in terms of collecting the quantitative and qualitative data insofar as these three questions are concerned? Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you so very much for your question. I just want to start with the first two questions because we had about 15 minutes. I was not able to really share my entire proposal, but if we had more time, you would realize that I am actually using an instrument developed by Brown, where he used that instrument to quantify the teacher's conceptions of assessment. So he has an instrument for the primary and secondary level, and he has used that instrument, like I said, throughout the world, where he's quantifying that teacher conceptions of assessment, looking at it in terms of 4 broad areas. So there's an instrument. I have already reached out to him. He has given me permission to use the instrument for assessing teachers' conceptions of assessment. Additionally, he also has an instrument where he also can quantify the assessment practices in relation to the 4 conceptions of assessment that he identified. And he has also given me permission to use that as well. The thing is, because I'm looking at also assessment practices in relation to mathematical proficiency, there will be some modification in that instrument to more or less pull out key aspects of mathematical proficiency in terms of the questions that will be asked so that the teachers can respond to that. But in terms of quantifying it, there are instruments that have been used, validated all over. Again, it will be pilot tested in the Caribbean context to further validate it for our context, but this particular instrument by Brown has been utilized all over, and it has proven to be able to quantify teachers' conceptions of assessment and quantify those practices. So that's the first 2 questions. In terms of, you asked in terms of the last question, is it?
The mixed methods, yeah.
The mixed method question, again, the idea is, now remember, this is a conceptualization.
Yes.
Right? So the idea is, after the teachers engage in the survey, that's Brown's survey with some modifications, I'm going to use the data, I'm going to analyze the data to prepare a interview protocol, an observation protocol, right? And then I'm going to use that to go into the schools, interview the teachers, and also observe the teachers in terms of practice in the mathematics classroom to sort of get a sense of in terms of what is happening based on the data from the survey. So in other words, I'm just going to see that triangulation type of activity to see what's the data from the questionnaire, how will what I observe confirm or not confirm what is it that the teachers are saying from the questionnaire or the survey. Okay, I'm hoping I answered your questions.
Yeah, just to clarify, I wanted to know what aspects do you observe, which you quantify?
What aspect would I observe to quantify?
Yes.
Well, it would be based on the data from the survey. Based on that, then I would more or less use that to more or less develop the instrument to observe and to also prepare the interview protocol.
Some important questions for us to continue to think through. I think, Nitha,
right. So yes.
Yeah, I think because you're in the early stage, you can continue thinking through those questions. I think that there's some important questions, but thanks for tackling those responses. And thank you very much, Alfred. You know, you're getting her ready. I see 3 hands up. I see Shelley. So Shelley, you first, then Bloom, and then I see Paula. So colleagues, remember, we have 3 students who presented today, Paula, Nitha, and Gabrielle. So let's ensure that our questions are spread nicely around so that we can have each student respond so that we can support. So Shelley, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. To Gabriel, I didn't hear you talking about parents, and I think they're very key. Maybe I didn't hear you. They are very key, especially in farm schools. I know maybe the conditions for the parents in farm schools, it's not easy for them, to attend to such activities of their children. I didn't hear you. How are you responding to that? And what is new about your study? Is it really different from what the Department of Education is doing? I didn't hear. I mean, what is new? What new thing are you bringing on the table from your study? Or is it the normal thing which Department of Basic Education is doing? Question to Nitha. I think you have answered my question, although I was not aware this is a proposal, but it's a good proposal anyway. Thanks very much for that. But maybe in your study, because you're saying with a focus on mathematical proficiency, I thought you have to make us understand, what are those mathematical skills, maybe proficiency that you want to focus on. And looking at the conceptions that you are referring to, I think there are 4. The conceptions that you are referring to, they are looking at improving, and also you're saying teacher and student accountability. To me, if I look at your conception and looking at the mathematical proficiency, I thought you'd say something on how do we improve the mathematical proficiency. I thought maybe you'd also say that in your study as you move on, because you have given us a picture that maths is a problem. But now, if you don't assist me as a reader, saying you have painted a picture that the learners are not doing well in maths, like you have indicated, but you don't, show us how then can we improve, on those mathematical proficiency. Like you mentioned, the conceptual understanding, we know it's a problem. And also the procedural understanding. We know normally as we teach maths, we just teach maybe the formulas. We don't take them to a deeper level of conceptual understanding. Why any number to power 0 is 1? We only just define those things, not showing them why. I think those are the questions in assessment that we have to dig deeper into them, maybe assisting even the teachers as they do the assessment. Because you said they were assessing to a test. I know when you're saying that, they just ask the procedural things like rules, but they don't pitch assessment to conceptual understanding. I thought maybe in your research, those are the things that you have to take us to town, because we have interest of saying if maths is a failing subject, what then do we do? Maybe for now I can pause here. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Shelley. Before Nitha comes in, I would want to give Gabrielle the opportunity to respond to the 2-part question that was posed. What's the role of the parents in this conversation and in this project around improving participation of education governors in school governance in farm schools? And then another question from Shelley is, what is new that is being done in this project? So, and Shelley obviously has a deeper understanding of this particular context. So thanks for that, Shelley. Gabrielle, over to you.
Thanks, Doc. The parents are part of the research and they are involved. The only thing with the school governance in South Africa, when the officials of the department or whoever addresses school governance issues, he will separate parents from the educators, educator governance. Whenever he or she addresses the governing bodies, he will say, you parents, the governing body, excluding the educators as well as learner governors. That is the most critical point. And then that leads to their when they operate at school level, they work now in silos, and it creates conflict between the educator governors as well as the parent governors. Two, what is new? The new issue. You remember that in South Africa, we've got now these unions. So the unions now are making use of educators to fight the parent governors, to tell them that you are not part of that structure. You are representing the interest of educators. So that's also create problems between the educators and the school governing bodies. I hope my answers is addressing Mr. Mloyi.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. Thanks for that. Nitha, do you want to quickly respond to the comments that was raised by Shelley?
Thank you so much, Shelley, for your comment. I agree with you in terms of the whole idea of improving mathematical proficiency. However, for every research, I can't go with the entire pie or the entire pizza. I have to start somewhere with a slice at a time. So definitely, I want to start with those teachers' conceptions. How do they view assessment, so that we can start from how they view assessment to sort of try to see how we can tackle the practices, and especially the practices in terms of developing proficiencies in the classroom. So definitely this is just the beginning of the research. Looking forward to doing even more research from this particular topic, and definitely there will be a focus on mathematical proficiency as I get into the research climate and the research architecture. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We will move quickly to Bloom and then Paula. So colleagues, can I ask that you quickly ask your question? And for those who are responding, if you respond in a succinct way. So Bloom, over to you. Hello? Bloom, are you there? Okay, so while Bloom might be working out any technical issues on his or her side, Paula, you have a question? It's interesting that a panel member has a question. We'll go right ahead, Paula.
Well, I just wanted to thank you. I just wanted to respond to a question that I actually saw in the chat. And then I didn't want that particular question to get lost. I saw a query. How did you find, thanks, Paula, how did you find, yes, how did you find participants, and what ethical considerations do you make in this study? Again, thank you again for the question. The participants were recruited through snowball sampling technique and a recruitment flyer. So the snowball sample technique was extremely beneficial as identities of persons living within the children's homes are confidential. So when they come out into mainstream society, again, their identities are confidential, and they therefore depended on caregivers, finding other caregivers and letting them know about the research and introduce themselves to me. The recruitment flyer was also incorporated because in the full-scale study, I wanted to ensure that there was a younger demographic than those seen within the pilot study. So the IRB approved flyer indicated which year they should have left residential care. And of course, then I would have received a response based on the recruitment flyer. The second part, what ethical considerations did you make in this study? Well, the study itself had to be IRB approved. Participants, they had to sign a consent form to demonstrate their voluntary willingness to participate in the study. Participants understood that they were free to end the interview should they desire to. Participants also understood that they had the opportunity for provision of counseling should this be required when they were doing the interview or after, and also to ensure anonymity. Their signatures on the consent form was the provision of any letter of their choice. So it was not their full name. It just needed some type of mark or signature, and it was a letter of their choice. Again, ethical procedures during the interview process. When there were online interviews, only the audio feature was used. I did not utilize the video feature. And within transcripts, any type of identifiers were removed. And of course, in the final reporting, also within this presentation, I would use synonyms to speak or refer to participants. So those are the ethical considerations that I would have taken into consideration.
Thanks for that, Paula. Really appreciate it. Colleagues, we're at that point in time when, you know, we are having a really good conversation. Time flies on us. So we are now 11:29. I want to take this opportunity to pass the space back over to my colleague, Vonani. Vonani, do you have any closing remarks as we wrap up this particular session and look forward to this session that is going to come next week? So I know Vonani will express my thanks to the students, Paula, Nitha, and Gabrielle, and she will say so much more so eloquently. So Vonani, I hand over to you.
Yes, I'm actually excited, Paula, Nitha, and Gabrielle, because today and the conversation, it's true, the conversation is just warming up and then we are supposed to stop. But today epitomized what we envisaged, that we will be coming together you know, in this fashion from different contexts, but the same in our articulation and experiences, and we cross-pollinate, and that has just happened. I'm so excited. Also at the, you know, conversations about, oh, you need to link up with this one and so forth. And so I want to appreciate the spirit. I also know that you probably have given some energy to other colleagues who are doing their respective studies. So please be encouraged, colleagues, that the idea of coming together in this fashion is definitely very beneficial, not just to candidates, but to also supervisors. And, you know, we wish we could be more, you know, global in our endeavors moving forward, and bridge the divide that also sometimes work against us. I don't wish to to talk too much, because mine was to really appreciate all the presenters and also all of you who stayed until this time of the day. Please have a blessed, productive day ahead. On the other side, and with us, it's almost, you know, descending time where we're now looking forward to the evening and the nights. But thanks, and until next week, when we should be continuing with our conversations, please, let's stay in touch. Let's ask ourselves and each other these difficult sometimes questions. Hopefully we're making the difference in the way that we will not be able to quantify. Thank you. Good evening. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.